Hi, everybody. For those of you who missed the Data for AI meetup in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, I wanted to record a formal version of the zero point 0.8 release of Apache Gravitino's like release notes and kind of what are the new features that we're noticing in this. I'm from Data Strato, and so I help work on the product there. But we helped contribute to and create this project called Apache Gravitino, which is an open source data catalog. So we're going to get into sort of a slight overview of Gravitino in a moment, but generally speaking, I really wanted to create something that highlighted the community contributions to Apache Gravitino and what we're going to see in this particular release that's so exciting. So this is the third major release that we have with the Apache Software Foundation for Apache Gravitino. For those of you who don't know, Apache Gravitino is still an incubating project, and so having a third major release is a really big deal. I think it's really getting this project to where it needs to be to eventually hit graduation. But it also has a lot of really cool features that are being introduced, including the model catalog, introducing views for file set management and access, as well as credential vending for security and to actually manage your access with file sets. And we also introduced more connectors within our Lakehouse Federation system, including a Flink Iceberg and Flink Pymon connector. And of course, we also have a Spark Pymon connector in there as well. So, of course, we support a lot of tools within the Iceberg ecosystem, but we also, with Apache Gravitino, see a lot of extensible interoperability with other open table formats as well. And we'll get into that a little bit too. And some also quality of life security enforcements that are just around the table that you would expect from a governance focused catalog. For those of you who don't know what Apache Gravitino is, I'm going to do a really quick run through. So, the model of Apache Gravitino is to really create a data fabric layer and metadata management system that can really unify your stack end to end from the lakehouse to your open source AI ML stack. And so, being able to do this and having all of your metadata managed in one system allows you to query and manage the access using the different tools that you might have in your stack across different teams. So, for instance, you might have a query engine used in one team, like Spark, and then another team might be using Trino, and then you have another, AI ML team that's using, Python. And so, how are you managing the access between all these different teams, and how are you managing the life cycle of these data and AI assets? Essentially, Gravitino does a catalog of catalogs model as well as its own catalog where you can manage and register the metadata within a single layer without having to duplicate it. And then you're going to enforce your governance within that layer. And so then the query engines or whatever's trying to access the data has to go through that catalog. And that way you can trace and you can manage many different things that are really useful for governance, right? So again, it's really about trying to consolidate what is about like messy data architectures. So we kind of realize that if you're going to have streaming data in one place, you might have models that you manage, or file sets, or different data assets around the other side, and then your relational stores and your data lakehouse system or your distributed data system. You want to be able to consolidate that all into one single place where you can have your source of truth and you can actually manage the data in a less painful way. This is also really important if you're working on multiple cloud architectures or hybrid cloud architectures. So you might have data on-prem, you might have data not just on AWS, but also on AWS and GCP. How are you going to manage all of those assets in one place so that you can regain that metadata, because metadata is oftentimes the key to vendor lock-in, and so we want to help liberate some of that. And how do you federate between all these layers? Can I query on multiple cloud systems at once? How do I make sure that my GDPR or HIPAA compliance is in place and I'm not moving data out of specific regions that I don't need to? And so having a federated model is really important for this. Gravitino really strives to, again, create a lightweight layer, really made up of open interfaces and APIs where many different teams can query and put their REST requests into. And so really what we're looking at is something that can power both business intelligence data infrastructure and AI ML development. This is really important for us just as modern day data engineers and machine learning engineers to be able to consolidate and manage so many different assets and break down a lot of these different silos that we might see instead of creating so many end-to-end pipelines that we're not necessarily sure how we're going to manage or clean up, right? How are we going to manage the access around all these different assets? And then make it easier for something like a generative AI framework to also pull off of and to interact with directly. And this can also help power a lot of our basic governance needs that we might have, such as data lineage, our observability, different metrics that we might find interesting, and to discover the data itself. This is really important for us to be able to get right early on so that we can save a lot of headaches down the line. The way that Gravitino works, as I mentioned, is sort of a catalog of catalogs model. And so we have what's called a metadata lake, but really you can think of it as a metadata plane as well. And what you're doing is that you're creating different catalogs that manage all of these different assets. So for instance, you might have a relational store that uses a JDBC catalog. You might have a lakehouse architecture that uses some sort of open table format, say Iceberg, for instance, and you might have like some file sets or a file system such as Hadoop. And you might also have, say, some AI models or some Kafka topics that you also want to manage alongside like a schema registry. And so all of this is data that's really useful for us, but also needs to be governed and oftentimes enforced with the same policies and managed. And so by pulling them all into the data lake, just the metadata itself, and cataloging it, we can then store that into an external store. So in this case, a metadata storage that we have, and then serve it as a REST API or some other way so that then we can power something like a data platform, or we can make sure that our data infrastructure teams are able to plug it into their internal tooling to make it more useful for serving to other external teams. This is really important because we want to make sure that anybody that's accessing our data assets are doing so in a controlled way, and that then we can consolidate and manage and unify so many of our different data assets that are being used to power generative AI and analytics. So let's get into some of the major updates that we'll have here in Apache Gravitino 0.8, which is really exciting. So the first is that we've really gone above and beyond to expand the Lakehouse Federation. And with this comes a lot more connectors. So the bread and butter of Apache Gravitino, and kind of the main thing that maybe you might use it for, is that it supports many different open table formats, many different data stores, alongside all these different query engines that are on the market right now in the open source world. And so we have support not just for Apache Iceberg, but also for Apache Hudi, for Paimon, of course, and many other different frameworks as well. And so in this particular release, we've introduced more connectors. And so there is now a Flink Paimon connector and a Flink Iceberg connector. So you can now use Flink to query your Iceberg tables and your Paimon tables. And of course, a Spark Paimon connector as well. So there's been a lot more Paimon support introduced in this particular release. And you can see some of the issues that are down there as well. So if you want to go on the repo and you want to see that particular piece of code and see, maybe if it's useful for your organization or see how it was implemented, you're more than welcome to as well. And this is just a very small taste of the larger ecosystem that we have within Apache Gravitino as well, but maybe that's for another video. We've also introduced a machine learning catalog. And so in 0.8, we've introduced model metadata management. And so if you have many different models that maybe your machine learning teams or your AI ML teams are implementing, you want to be able to manage them and ideally alongside your data assets as well, so you can understand better, maybe what features went into this particular experiment, what data went into this particular experiment, and what were the results. So from an experimental standpoint, I think that we have come a long way in understanding maybe why it's so important to track experiments and to manage the assets around experiments. But from a governance perspective, I think that it's really important in an enterprise AI system to also be able to manage these things together. And so, of course, this is the first introduction of this new feature, so we're going to have more basic functionality, but really we're looking at managing multiple versions of your models and then tagging them and then serving them to different users to use which ones are appropriate for their particular use case. And so Future releases are obviously going to build up more on this, and you're going to be able to extract a lot more value out of your models, especially now that you can now track your models alongside your data lakehouse assets. And I think that's really cool to be able to do that. And of course, you can see maybe where in the repo you can find some of these features as well. So Fuse for File Set is going to be the third really major feature that we are putting in here. And so when you're using file sets in different AI development scenarios, you want to really improve the usability of that particular file set, and then reduce the number of times that somebody has to access that particular file set, and really drive down the user costs. So this is kind of within the realm of FinOps. And of course, when you're working in a either hybrid or cloud native environment, you're going to access a lot of remote data, and especially through your local system. And so what Fuse does is that it's a framework that helps users really access that data as if they were working on their local system, but you're actually accessing remote data instead. And so 0.8 introduces a new feature where you can actually access S3 data that's managed by IleSet instead. And so really seamless user experience here. And you're going to be able to also support multiple users trying to access all of these data, and not really have to have disruption by having to manage all of these different namespaces and all these different remote access systems, and having something that's a little bit more seamless. So this is more of a quality of life for your machine learning AI ML teams that are in there. Future support includes, more metadata caching, so you can have higher performance and support for more storage as you're using Fuse in your daily work. And of course, as well, this is implemented in Rust. So Gravitino is currently implemented mostly in Java, and this particular feature was actually implemented in Rust to increase the performance, which I think is a really interesting choice. And I think that this is something that's really going to improve the quality of life, because something like this, you really want to have a seamless experience. You want to have it become fast, and you want to drive down user costs. And so it's really important to have something that's performant and cutting edge in this particular space. For credential vending, so currently Gravitino supports a lot of different security features, and we have our own push down permission management system. And with credential vending, what we do is that we actually uh, issue out these different temporary tokens as you're creating these access systems, so then you can have them expire at a certain point. This is really useful because then you can give people maybe one-time use. You can give a query engine one-time use to be able to access that particular data. And it's more secure this way, because then that token will eventually expire. This is supported specifically for the Iceberg REST service as well. So Apache Gravitino has its own modularized Iceberg REST server. And this is used with the Iceberg REST catalog service as well, and follows full spec. And this is something that can also be supported within the Gravitino server itself and integrated with file sets. So let's say you have a team that wants to access a particular file set, and you're managing kind of the remote access to that. You can then use temporary credential vending to manage their access and to make things a little bit more secure. So this is really something that's great if you're working with different cloud vendors as well. So in 0.8, you can see that there's additional support in Google Cloud Storage and S3. And this is also supported in the OSS and ADLS for the type of credential vending that you can have. So there's a lot of different options here for you to manage the tokens and how you're vending them. And I think that for an infrastructure team, I think that this is really useful for implementing and enforcing your RBAC, to be able to have more fine-grained control over who's accessing what, and to have more peace of mind over making sure that nothing's left open with access that you don't necessarily want it to, and you can have a very specific control over who accesses what and for what period of time as well. The great thing about the credential vending system in Gravitino is that it's pretty pluggable, so you can plug it into other storage systems as well as your other security systems. So it's really a framework that's meant to be quite flexible and to integrate with maybe a system that you already have. There's also more security enforcement and quality of life things that have been done across the board as well. So specifically in our metadata management system, we've included, the ability to manage specific security policies, specifically in chain authorization. We've also included, push down of SQL security policies and path-based security policies as well, and the management of privilege policies, specifically for iceberg tables and Pymon tables. And the nice thing about this is that it also can be pushed down to an external framework such as Apache Ranger. Gravitino has pretty high support for Apache Ranger. That's kind of the underlying framework that we're using currently, but it's a highly pluggable system that's pretty flexible for your other security frameworks as well. I would highly recommend looking into maybe how this fits into your current architecture. And of course, if something's not supported, I think that the community is really awesome at picking up issues for user cases. So do create an issue if you feel like something's missing for your support system. There's also some minor updates that have been included here as well. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly just because I feel like the major stuff was maybe what was more interesting to folks. So with regards to the Iceberg REST server, we've also of course, been able to generate more credentials here using specifically the data path and metadata path. And so this is really great if you wanting to have more fine-grained access control that is more path-based. And so you can then integrate this into your other credential vending systems, such as your temporary tokens, and create something that is very fine-grained control to where somebody is accessing something or what they're trying to access, which is really great. And then, of course, you have the policies on top of that as well that you can more finely manage. Of course, we also allow you to integrate the audit log framework for the Iceberg REST service as well. So this is really nice if you want to generate some audit logs for your Iceberg REST service and do some debugging there. And for views, you can add schemas and view events for the Iceberg REST server as well. And this is really nice. And there's also a HTTP header that's been included for the Iceberg event. So generally speaking, I think that there's a lot of like small quality of life things that make the Iceberg REST service, it's already production ready and it's already really fully featured. But I think a lot of these things allow you to feel more at peace with sort of the longevity of this particular module that's in Gravitino and really feel like, okay, this is an Iceberg REST catalog service that I can use, 5, 10, 20 years from now. And it's, continuously being maintained and it's always adding new features and it's more reliable than ever. For the core features of Apache Gravitino, we're, really just kind of optimizing things here. So we're optimizing the tree lock, especially when you're dropping and loading different table schemas. This makes things just a little bit faster and just like a really nice quality of life improvement. There's also support for ADLS storage for Gravitino in the Iceberg catalog and the Spark connectors. This is really great if you're using an ADLS storage. And generally speaking, there's a lot of like sort of small features that have to be updated throughout the entire code base that you're noticing whenever we introduce like a new connector or a new storage support or a new open table format. So there's a lot of things that kind of have to be rounded out with Gravitino. And there's a lot of work the community does to make it so seamless. Of course, there's also support for pre-events within the Gravitino server as well. And within the client, there's a CLI interface now for Apache Gravitino. So previously, you used mostly REST commands or you used the GUI in some way to interact with Gravitino. But now you have a full command line interface that you can use. And this is fully featured, so you can make Gravitino really scriptable. You can deploy it in maybe more convenient ways to yourself right now, or maybe you can just get hands-on with Gravitino in a little bit of an easier way. And this was written as well by our awesome community managers and by our community members who really just kind of wanted to increase the quality of life and user experience within Apache Gravitino. And there's now support for in the Python client that Gravitino has. So Gravitino has a Python package, and this Python package and Python client now also supports table operations, which is really exciting if you're looking to manage within a Python ecosystem and you're wanting to create more of a seamless experience between, your Java tools that you might be using Gravitino with and the Python stack that you might be using alongside it. And so, yeah, I think that all of these are really great tools that people have. And generally speaking, I think that really we're noticing much more well-rounded features coming into Gravitino. We're noticing the maturity of features in every single release really well developed and more contributors really coming into the project. There's been some amazing community members and organizations that have given their time to help make the releases of Gravitino better and bigger each time. And I think that for a zero point 0.8 release, this is really nice to see some of these features come in. And, I think that the ideas around security and us having such a focus on that as a community, especially as like a governance catalog, is so important. I think that really it's going to help people feel more at peace with using something like an incubating project. And so I think it was the right direction to go. Huge thank you to, of course, contributors and the community of Apache Gravitino who've worked on this. There's been over 30 contributors who have helped daily and to bring in these new features, and for anybody who raises issues and just continues to test out what we're doing. And of course, our release manager, Jerry Shao, who we'll be talking to in a little bit as well in the next couple of weeks to kind of get his take on why he chose some of these features and maybe what some of the usability of these features look like in more of a practical sense. And so we're going to look forward to the next zero point 0.9 release as well. I think that it's running right now towards 1.0. And so we'll see some really exciting stuff come before then as well. Scan this QR code if you want to check out the Apache Gravitino repo. So if you just go to GitHub and then go to Apache/Gravitino, you're going to hit the repo. And then these are the 0.8 release notes, pretty literally taken from the release notes. So if you just had two releases and then check out the release notes there, pretty much a summary of what was spoken in this particular video. And yeah, thank you for being interested in Gravitino and for checking out this project. I think that it's something that's really fast growing, and it's been here for like around like a year and a little bit. So there's been so much development that's occurred, and I think there's a ton of features that we're looking to highlight more. So yeah, thank you very much.